Let's now bring you the latest about the conflict happening in Yemen. The Saudi-led military coalition has now confirmed launching a major operation against the Houthis in Yemen. Yemen's capital city, Sana'a, has been subjected to a fierce aerial attack from the Saudi-led coalition. Till now, at least 57 airstrikes have been carried out on the capital, and a dozen of these strikes were on the international airport. Airstrikes have also been carried out in the towns of Marib, Haja, and the rebel stronghold province of Sada. As per Yemen media reports, a number of people have been injured in these strikes. Residents are calling these attacks unjustified and an attempt to end all life in Yemen.
غارتين جوية هكذا بدون أي مبرر، وكما تعلمون لا بتشاهدوا يعني زيوت وإدارات سيارات وكفرات وبطاريات، يعني لا يوجد أي سكن عسكري مجاور للحنجر هذا، وإنما هذا عدوان ظالم غاشم يريد أن يدمر البنية التحتية للشعب اليمني وأن ينهي كل مظاهر الحياة.
Now, for more insights into the ongoing violence in Yemen, joining us live from Milan is Mikey K, a former RAF pilot and an investigative journalist. Hi, Mikey. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, we know that the fighter jets from a Saudi-led coalition battling Yemen's Houthi rebels have launched dozens of airstrikes on the Yemen province. Before we delve further into this, could you summarize for our viewers some of the roots of this conflict?
Yeah, I mean, the context is it all started off with the National Dialogue Conference in 2013-2014, which was a UN and GCC-backed conference inside Yemen that technically involved all parties across the political spectrum, from those loyal to Salah, who was the original long-term president that had been there for decades. And the idea of the conference was effectively to take the corrupt president Salah and allow him to stand down peacefully, so not forcefully removing him like we saw in Iraq with Saddam Hussein, and then coming up with a plan and a protocol that had a transition of power, if you like, from this long-term dictatorship. Now, that was along the lines of the vice president, Hadi, who effectively was involved in the corrupt Salah government. Hadi is Saudi-backed, and the idea was to give the vice president the presidency for a year, and which was extended to 2 years while the transition was made. And the transition was leading up to elections in Yemen that were fair, that were just, that were democratic, that then put in place a representative government across Yemen. That didn't happen because a couple of representatives of Ansar Allah, which is effectively the party that oversees the Houthis, were assassinated, and that's when, in 2014, 2015, that's when the turmoil started occurring. In 2015, Saudi Arabia then decided to take military activity and operations against the Houthis in Yemen. But it's important to say that the majority of the activity, the military activity by the Saudis, has been through air power and air power alone. It's the Houthis that have had the domination of the ground through boots on the ground. And the current situation is that in the north west and across the western side of the country, well, most of the ports, that's where the Houthis are dominant. And then beyond to the east, beyond Sana'a, beyond to the east is where the Saudi-led coalition, the Saudi backed forces, the Saudi loyal forces are prominent.
Right. Now, my next question is, the pandemic has, of course, had resulted in a ceasefire of sorts in the region, and now the violence is escalating yet again. So what are the casualties from this violent attack?
Well, I think where we're at the moment is that Saudi have been involved in this massive and, quite frankly, brutal air campaign since 2015. They've got the Typhoon jet. I've got sources inside Saudi that train the Saudi pilots, and some of the stories are very eye-opening and not in a good way in terms of the level of ability of Saudi pilots to actually target the right targets and not stray off target, if you like. Now, we've seen all sorts of, quite frankly, activity in terms of precision-guided munitions being dropped on funerals, on school buses, on homes that have caused massive collateral to the point where, these type of incidents should have been taken up again into the International Criminal Court for potential war crimes. That's how bad these incidents have been. However, the Saudis have been asked to investigate their own issues at the UN Human Rights Council. So this is another sort of, this is another sort of piece of the puzzle, if you like, which just doesn't sit right with the international community in terms of allowing Saudi to investigate its own issues. That said, what we now have is it's 2020, and Saudi hasn't really got anywhere near to achieving its military objectives inside Yemen. It's actually quite futile. The Houthis have the dominance on the ground, and for 5 years now, Saudi Arabia has been trying to gain military objectives and win military objectives through this air power campaign. If you look back to examples in history like Vietnam, for example, which had, the US had all the air power in the world and it had boots on the ground, and it was still futile against quite a sophisticated insurgency. That's something you see in Yemen similar. The Houthis are very sophisticated. The Houthis are part of the Zaidi branch of Islam that have been in the northern part of Yemen for thousands of years, so they're not going anywhere. And then you've got this idea of the proxy battle where the Houthis are Iranian-backed, and then you have this idea of a more, if you pull out a little bit, you see this idea of a proxy war inside Yemen, where the Saudis are trying to gain ground inside Yemen through Hadi loyalists, and the Houthis are basically dominating the ground, and they're backed by the Iranians.
My final question, I'd like to focus on Yemen and, of course, the suffering of the people. Now, the UN has called the crisis in Yemen the world's worst humanitarian disaster. We know of the food crisis, which looms large, the poverty in the nation, which is already battling it. Now, can you give us some insights into this humanitarian disaster and the aid that the country actually needs?
Well, some are calling it the worst humanitarian disaster in the world at the moment, and that's quite a significant and tragic title to be able to own when you've got humanitarian disasters in places like Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan when it comes to refugees and the quality of life there. The COVID-19 pandemic has overlaid on top of Yemen what has already been an absolute catastrophe when it comes to drought, when it comes to famine, when it comes to poverty. And so, we're now in a situation where conflict is just compounding this even further. That said, Saudi Arabia is also hurting from COVID-19. Oil prices are down. And so I don't think this is a war that Saudi wants to be involved in for much longer. And actually, we have seen evidence that it's trying to extricate itself from that. The international community really does need to step up to provide a military umbrella over Yemen to allow aid agencies to get in there and actually just service the humanitarian component. The only people that are losing in all of this isn't the power in Saudi or the Houthis. It's the actual people on the ground, and it's an absolutely catastrophic, diabolical state, which has only been compounded more by COVID-19. So, again, we go back to the old UN Chapter 6, Chapter 7 operations, Chapter 6 being the use of non-lethal force, Chapter 7 allowing lethal force to be able to set up an umbrella. I think we go back to sort of 2013, 2014. We try and establish the original conditions and then set up the structures and the foundations for an actual transitional government that is representative of each of the 6 areas that are in Yemen now. And I think that is the only way. And hopefully, if there's a silver lining to COVID-19, that might, maybe I'm being naive here, but that may hopefully allow that transition to come sooner rather than later.
Right. Thank you so much, Mikey, for all your inputs and for joining us this morning.